On election night in 2000, I was at the hotel at our headquarters in our suite, and Senator Robb was actually home having dinner with his family. And when the first network indicated that they were calling a race for George Allen, I called him. I said, well, we need to start discussing when you're going to come down and what you're going to say. And he told me very pleasantly that, you know, he was going to go ahead and finish dinner and he was going to call me back.
Thank you.
And Senator Robb spoke with such eloquence that night. You literally could have heard a pin drop in the room.
I am very, very grateful to all of you, and I am very grateful to have had the opportunity to serve this great Commonwealth for the better part of the last quarter century. There is no way that I could have ever had that high honor if I hadn't had so much help from so many people and so much dedicated commitment, absolute commitment.
It was some time before he left, and he came to work the next day with a smile on his face, and he was in a good mood.
A lot of his life revolves around his commitment to public service, be it in the military or in elective office or whatever.
I'm told now by my siblings, I'm the eldest of my sibling group, and I'm told that they expected things that perhaps I wasn't planning on or expecting. They're telling tales that they may have embellished a little bit over the years, or may have seemed more relevant or interesting or applicable now than they did 35 years ago when Linda and I first started dating.
I remember Chuck Robb when he married Linda Johnson. That was back when he was in the Marine Corps and in the 60s, and nobody really thought of him as a potential Democratic candidate for anything. He had a legacy of a powerful family, powerful political family, which I think helped him, and probably helped him decide what party he was going to be a member of. I always said that if Chuck Robb had been a Marine stationed at the White House during the Nixon administration, he might have married one of the Nixon girls and been a Republican, but that's just my own speculation.
I would bring the color guard up, and we would march up the grand staircase and go into the Yellow Room, and we would march in officially, and I would salute the president, and I would salute the king or the prime minister, whatever, and go through a little ritual and ask permission to remove the colors. And we would march down out of the Yellow Room and down the grand staircase, and at the bottom of the steps we would part, and that's where all the official photographs were taken. If you notice, anytime there's official photograph, and it's still done today. We both think we met on our own turf. I was stationed at Marine Barracks, 8th and I Street in Washington, D.C., and she was living at the White House. She asked me to be her escort to an event and invited me to come up to the family quarters of the solarium and play bridge. And it was very casual, and we got invited to some other events, and eventually we realized that we were serious about each other and decided to get married. We did most of our dating inside the White House, or inside the White House umbrella, I guess you'd say. After the two of us had really mutually decided that we wanted to get married, I thought I wanted to go through the old-fashioned protocol. I recall starting the conversation and saying, "I suspect you know why I have requested this meeting," and he said, "I think I do." After a little small talk, I formally asked him, and he couldn't have been more gracious. He said, "Of course." In all honesty, I doubt that he really noticed me until Linda said, you better notice this one." We were engaged almost a month before any public notice was given. It was our little secret. As I became a member of the family and I was privy to conversations that normally you wouldn't expect to know anything about, and I realized the depth of his commitment to things like civil rights in particular. I became a true believer, whereas I might have been a little skeptical. Like most people, you tend to view with a certain degree of skepticism people who are involved in the political process. My respect for him as a man and as a committed public servant increased with that experience, and I'm certain that it had an influence on my later devotion to and commitment to equal rights, human rights, civil rights. He had a chance to make a difference when he was in office. Later on, when I had a chance to make a difference, I took that chance. I suspect that my experience as a combat infantry commander in Vietnam was probably the defining experience of my life. And there was a long period of time that many of my contemporaries were going over to Vietnam, some not coming back, some going over even for a second tour, and I'm getting one good, really good assignment after another, ending up with the Marine Barracks and the White House assignment, and I was feeling very guilty about not going over. And I was actually given an opportunity to resign because I'd more than fulfilled my obligated service. And I said, "You don't understand. I very much want to go and serve in Vietnam."
I hated the fact that I was going to be separated from my husband. But I knew when we got married that he was committed to go to Vietnam. And he felt it was his duty. And like it or not, from my personal standpoint, you know, duty, duty, duty is something that's always been a very important part of his being. So I followed him as much as I could all the way to California and just baked cookies for him and put him on the airplane, and then just did a lot of praying for the next 13 months. And it was particularly hard because I was expecting a baby.
Marines did 13-month tours during that particular period, so I came back on what happened to be the 13th anniversary of my departure, as well as the 6-month birthday of our firstborn daughter, Lucinda, and she greeted me at the airport when we came in.
Oh, well, it was very, very exciting. I was so excited about having him home, and most importantly, I was excited about having him safe. It was so wonderful to have him back, holding this little baby out to him with the yellow ribbon in her hair for her daddy, who was far, far away, and now he was home.
And there's a cute picture of Linda holding up this 6-month-old daughter, and you can tell from the expression on our daughter's face, she was saying, in effect, "Who is this strange fellow that you're handing me to?" She didn't cry. She just looked somewhat quizzical at this strange fellow that was entering her life.
He had decided he was going to go to law school here at the University of Virginia. But the president had decided that he wanted them in Texas. And Chuck Robb told Lyndon Johnson he wasn't going to do that. He was going to the University of Virginia. He was going to law school. He was going to have a home in Northern Virginia, not in Texas. Now, standing up to any father-in-law can be intimidating. But can you imagine standing up to Lyndon Johnson?
Chuck was third year at UVA Law when I was first year, and he was famous. He was the son-in-law of the President of the United States, or at least the recent president, and everybody knew him and everybody recognized him, and so when he came down the halls, you noticed.
In the early 70s, when Robb was a law student at the University of Virginia, he was conservative. He wore a suit when other people wore jeans. He was conservative on the war in Vietnam when the vast majority of students were anti-war. Really, Chuck Robb at that time was at war with the spirit of the age. But then the age changed, and Robb's persona fit the new age perfectly. And politics is all about timing. Robb got into politics and had an immediate entree into the highest levels because of Lyndon Johnson, but he also had to work very hard to prove that he was much more conservative than his father-in-law.
And the way Chuck Robb always responded to that was, yes, I did marry a famous woman, marry into a famous family. People will turn out to see me because of that, but they will not vote for me because of that. That just gets them there. I have to convince them to vote for me, and he did that.
The Johnson treatment we all read about, where the president would sort of drag someone by the lapels right up in front of him and say, "This, you have to do this." I can't imagine Chuck grabbing anybody by the lapels.
I had been involved in holding office in high school. I was a class president. I had served on student council in college. I had actually run for and been defeated when I ran for president of my senior class. Best thing that ever happened to me politically. It gave me a little comeuppance at a time that it was very important that I'd be taken down a peg or two.
I think it was inevitable that he was going to get into politics. It may not have appeared that way to his wife.
She would have been happy had he never gone into politics and was going to be a lawyer and whatever he was going on from there, but then has supported him the whole way through and seen what a difference it makes in our family, and that it was something that was very important to him.
Well, I have to tell you that I was not enthusiastic. I thought that I had gotten out of politics when my father had retired, and I was very happy leading a life free from the public glare.
I think she was intrigued by the response that I got when I was testing the waters, if you will.
Somebody said, "Wouldn't you like to meet Chuck Robb? He's thinking about running for office in Virginia." Immediately, I think he's captivating, this guy's exciting, but he's also pretty conservative for a Democrat, and I think that was my first impression, that he could probably get elected in Virginia.
When Robb started to run for lieutenant governor in 1977, he really wasn't the front runner. No one knew him personally. They knew of him from the White House wedding. In a sense, he had parachuted into Virginia. That was the term used by many Virginia politicians of the time.
Doesn't take any preparation for that. You just land. But he worked at it. He ran for lieutenant governor a man named Ira Leshner, a delegate from Arlington, Virginia. And he worked. He outmaneuvered him in every way. But he had that glamour star. And you have to admit, ex-Marine, son-in-law of a president. And Virginians were looking for a fresh face. And certainly the Democrats were. And this was the man at the hour and the time.
And my hero at that point was the late Lieutenant Governor Sarge Reynolds. And the view was that he was the hope of the Democratic Party. He died tragically in 1971 of a brain tumor at the age of 35 while he was a sitting lieutenant governor. And a lot of the problems the Democratic Party had in the 70s was that they lost their real leader in Sarge Reynolds. When I saw Chuck Robb coming on the scene, I saw another Sarge Reynolds. Physically attractive, charismatic, that could bring a vibrancy back to the Democratic Party that they were missing.
Chuck Robb came upon the scene sort of as a moderate, independent, middle-of-the-road Democrat, as opposed to contrast with Henry Howell.
He was in the middle of the road, the place where you get hit from both sides. So he had to be careful about how he ran the general election, and he ran a brilliant campaign in the general election. He turned out to be the only Democrat who won in otherwise a Republican landslide year. Literally, tens of thousands of Virginians consciously split their tickets to put him into office. That was the first indication that his image and his approach was going to work, and that it might be the chance Democrats had for a revival.
They always make the joke about lieutenant governors and vice presidents that the first thing they do every morning is inquire about the health of the governor or the president. That's really about their only official responsibility, is being ready.
There was no doubt about what he intended to do. He intended to run for governor from the very first moment he got into the lieutenant governor's office.
He requested an appointment with Governor Dalton. And he went up to Governor Dalton and he said, "As we begin, I want you to know that you will never read criticism of your policies or of your actions in the paper before I've had a personal conversation with you. And I want you to know that." And that's very unusual.
Absolutely. I made no bones about the fact that I was hoping eventually to be able to run for the office of governor, and I was going to be serious about being lieutenant governor. I knew that the principal duty was to preside over the Senate, and you did that full time, and to inquire about the health of the governor, lest you be required to succeed him on a particular occasion. Mainly, it was an opportunity to be practically an apprentice governor. Governor Dalton was kind enough to invite me to attend all cabinet meetings, even though I was a member of the opposite political party. And so I had a chance to get to know all the cabinet, watch them function. I got to know all the state and department and agency heads. I got a chance to see how government interacted, and I could assess the strengths and weaknesses of individuals and of departments. And so I came into office as governor well prepared based on my firsthand day-to-day experience with the operations of state government.
So it was a learning process for him, which I think stood him in good stead when he became governor, having presided over a part of the legislative branch.
There were a lot of questions about what does he stand for, a lot of sense that he didn't really stand for anything. He gave a speech right at the beginning of his campaign where he went through a whole litany of issues. And he said, I'm for it, I'm against it, I'm for it, I'm against it. And it really defined where he was on a lot of issues for people in a way that they hadn't known. I think the thing that helped him so much also was the fact that the party was so desperate. So whenever liberals felt uncomfortable with what he was doing, they could always look to the fact that what choice do we have?
Henry Howell, the populace, was sort of over the hill by that time. You can't use the slogan, keep the big boys honest, so many years and have it resonate with any voters. So you get to 1981, and we think we're invincible after 3 in a row. But we don't have a Henry Howell to kick around anymore.
Wherever he went, people responded to him. There was the focus on whoever he was talking to. And I remember that a supporter of ours in Buckingham County said that when Robb came through Farmville, nothing like that had happened since Elvis Presley came through Farmville. And I've not totally checked the record, but I don't believe Elvis Presley ever went to Farmville.
Well, Chuck Robb was a celebrity, and he was a star on the Virginia political scene. In the years that followed, we got a number of these. We got Elizabeth Taylor and John Warner, we got Oliver North, we got Doug Wilder. But this was the first time that we sort of had a national aura about a campaign. He didn't have to do a whole lot as a campaigner to make people want to come and look at him and see what he had to say.
Now, the easy answer is to say that Henry Howell was solely responsible for 12 years of Republican control. But that just isn't true. Henry Howell was in the business of polarizing the electorate. That was his only chance to win, to get his people out in large numbers because he had polarized the electorate. Robb was the anti-polarizer.
I think what was interesting about his being elected to lieutenant governor is the morning that he woke up, he all of a sudden, day one, was the titular head of the Democratic Party in Virginia. And that came as a shock, I think, to him and to everybody else as well. The party was in total disarray. It really took a while to figure out where the center of the party was going to be, and I think Chuck Robb was really responsible for repositioning the Democratic Party in a place where it could actually be successful in Virginia politics.
I had been elected lieutenant governor as the only statewide Democratic elected official. It was assumed that I was the heir apparent. Marshall Coleman had been elected attorney general. Since that's the only other statewide office and the governor cannot succeed himself under the Virginia Constitution, it was almost from the day after the election, literally, that the race for governor began. And many of the questions asked the day after the 1977 election had to do with the potential matchup in 1981.
So you had a 4-year campaign in which these two young lions were constantly circling one another and testing one another and trying to see which one would be king of the pride.
Chuck presented an image of competence, of charisma, and demonstrated by virtue of the positions he took that he was a centrist. He was not a radical liberal in the parlance of the time.
Well, I liked him. He was buttoned down. You know, he was a pure Marine, and Democrats have been losing in Virginia for a long time. And we thought we had to change the dynamic. We couldn't just play by the same rules, so we decided that we would try to expand the voter base. And if you'll look at the detail of that race, you'll see that for one of the first times in one of the few places, African Americans voted in a higher percentage than white voters did. That was a conscious strategy on our part. Well, we used TV a lot. I think our budget was $2.4 million or so. I think we ended up spending 55% on television. He was clearly very photogenic. He was made for television. The TV presented him pretty much as he was. So what you saw was what you got, and it worked pretty well.
Chuck Robb was a natural campaigner. People immediately like him. When politics is really performed at its best, it's about trust and about a connection with the people that you're talking with. So he was just in there right from the start. I wouldn't say the staff was particularly well organized, but we were diligent. I was not on the payroll. Everybody just about worked for free, but that's sort of the Robb way. If we don't have to pay for it, we won't pay for it.
In the early stages, it was invigorating. I campaigned all over the place. And Linda, who clearly did not want me to enter the political process, but once she knew it was important to me, and once she saw a lot of the reaction of people to me, entered into it wholeheartedly, and she was great.
Marriage is for better, for worse. And I'm a better campaigner than he is. I'd already been involved in many, many campaigns, and I didn't really particularly care about doing it again. But
the fact that I had been exposed to all of the heavy media attention and scrutiny when we first got engaged certainly made it easier. There's no question about that.
And of course, we want our best people to go into public service. We just don't always mean our very own people, because it's tough work.
I don't think the campaign trail was something that came easy for him, but like many other things with Senator Robb, if he put his mind to it, he could learn how to do it and be good at it. And he was good at it. When he got into something, he was going to work till he got it done.
Marshall Coleman and Chuck Robb were very different human beings. They may have had similar positions on many issues, but they couldn't have been more different in how they came across to people, how they came across to the general electorate. Robb was a stolid ex-Marine. He was predictable. He didn't threaten the status quo. Marshall Coleman was full of mirth and humor, and he was always quick with a gag. He was also quick to challenge the establishment. He had beaten an establishment candidate running for Attorney General in 1977, and the Byrd organization, the old conservative Democrats who'd become Republicans, never forgot that. So Coleman was considered to be almost the candidate more inclined toward change. It's no accident that Robb chose the slogan, "For a Virginia future worthy of her past." That was the slogan he ran on in 1981. He presented himself as the next governor in an old Virginia tradition. Marshall Coleman didn't seem that traditional, and he probably wasn't.
I'm really remembering more that it seemed to be a very difficult campaign for Marshall Coleman, and that he never really seemed to find his voice. And I think in part that was because he was not allowed to use the voice that was really his. There was a strong sense that he had to be the conservative candidate, that he had to hold together this coalition that had been formed of Republicans and the former Byrd Democrats. And in truth, that was not a natural fit for him.
He preceded George Bush the Sr. by many years in saying no new taxes. He would not raise taxes under any conditions during his term as governor. Robb took a very different position. He said it is not fiscally responsible to say under no conditions will I raise taxes because we don't know what the conditions will be during the next 4 years. I don't want to raise taxes. I would prefer not to raise taxes, but I can't pledge that I won't raise them.
Robb, on the other hand, was portraying himself as a moderate conservative, and that was a comfortable place for him to be. His problem was in not losing the left or the liberal wing of the party.
People don't like to have one party in charge of everything for very long. That actually helped the Democratic slate in 1981. People instinctively knew that if the Democrats lost that fourth straight gubernatorial election, they, the people of Virginia, might be stuck with one party in charge of Virginia for the foreseeable future. In Chuck Robb, they found someone that they could count on, somebody who didn't appear to change with the daily headlines, somebody who seemed to know who he was. He was a clear break with past Democrats, and that gave him a leg up.
You couldn't run against me the way they had run against George McGovern and Henry Howell because I just simply didn't fit the mold. But we knew it was going to be a tough race, and we knew it would go right down to the wire, and indeed the polls showed that we were neck and neck from beginning to end. I don't think there was ever any significant margin one way or the other, and the Republicans put a huge amount of money into reinforcing the image that Ronald Reagan was for Marshall Coleman, and I think that was simply overplayed. That and the combination of the fact that a lot of the Main Street conservatives, particularly cultural conservatives, had forced Marshall Coleman to take positions that I knew he was not comfortable with. So in debates, I had a natural advantage. I could argue the positions that I felt strongly about. He was constrained by some of the folks that were backing him financially to take positions that he really didn't subscribe to. He was so quick, he was so glib. He'd been president of the student body at the University of Virginia. He had everything going for him, but he was trying to sell a philosophy that was alien to him. He'd run for Attorney General to the left of Ed Lane, who'd been the Democratic nominee, and won, and then tried to come back and run to the right of me. It hurt him. It hurt his credibility. It hurt his basic believability in terms of some of the things that he had to say. It was a distinct advantage for me under the circumstances.
So when Virginia elected not just a Democratic governor, but an entire Democratic slate in 1981, it seemed to be very contradictory, but it really wasn't. Chuck Robb knew exactly what he had to do in order to win in 1981, and he never once veered from that path over the 4-year campaign toward 1981. He knew he had to appear moderate to conservative. He knew he had to convince Virginians that he was a Virginian, not a national politician that had parachuted in to the state. And he knew that he had to make a clean break with the past Democratic candidates to have a chance of winning. He did exactly that. He presented himself as a solid, conservative, old-line Democratic candidate with some new ideas, particularly about education, and it worked like a charm.
How sweet it is!
The night that he was elected, I was so proud of him. I just thought he had a wonderful campaign. He'd been true to what he believed in.
You've got to believe, and you did believe, and it's ours. We did it. We said that if we did all that we could do, and it involved everyone here, and we could not have done it without your help, we said that if we did it for the first time in 16 years, we were going to elect a Democratic governor.
I do solemnly swear
I do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Virginia,
and that I will faithfully and impartially discharge
and that I will honorably and faithfully and impartially discharge
all the duties incumbent upon me
all the duties incumbent upon me
as Governor of Virginia, according to the best of my ability,
according to the best of my ability,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I think really from day one, Chuck Robb was governor, and he understood authority. Maybe this is the Marine Corps in him, but authority and line of command were sort of, I guess, the major principles.
And there were many, many people that wanted to come to Richmond to see Governor Robb inaugurated. The decision was made to move it to the flatter, colder north side of the Capitol. And a lot of wags said, well, of course, we've always faced south. Now that Robb is governor, I guess we'll be facing north.
The day of the inaugural, the swearing in, there was about a foot of snow around the Capitol. It was freezing cold, but, you know, we didn't care. We were happy.
The Democrats, as Jerry Belial said on election night, won back the keys. And all seemed peaceable in Virginia.
A future Virginia will measure us against the standards of the extraordinary past that we have inherited.
He had a lot to learn about the legislative process, some of the very substantial egos, and in Governor Robb's defense, I suspect there were several members of the legislature who felt they should be sitting in the governor's chair, and that might very well have been a significant factor in their attitude towards him, their behavior towards his agenda.
There were important and well-known people in the legislature who referred to him disparagingly as Chucky Bird because he was the son-in-law of Lyndon Baines Johnson. I think those people changed their minds well before he became elected governor, and one heard very little of that after January of 1982.
I think the Republicans liked him, actually. He was not blatantly partisan. He was not vindictive. His major policies, we did not mount any attacks against them. As far as I can recall, all of his major initiatives had broad Republican support.
This was a government comprised of three branches, three equal branches, and the legislators, I think, were pretty intent on reminding Robb that that would be the case.
He had a huge capacity for work. I haven't seen anybody that ever could work harder. He would occasionally complain about it. He could work from sunup to sundown and was usually there till 1 o'clock in the morning just about every day, and he expected the staff to work just about as hard as he did. We used to joke that he used to put everybody through sort of the Paris Island equivalent of the first 3 months when you came to work for him. And if you survived the first 3 months, you were in. We used to call it being robbed. And everybody that ever worked for him was robbed at one point or another. Some people made it and some people didn't. But once you were in, and part of the Corps, you were in.
There is no question that I benefited from an extraordinarily able, professional, dedicated team. I have all my life. I have been fortunate enough to surround myself with really good quality people who were dedicated to the objective or the mission or the goals and made me look good.
Robb liked to hear directly from the people he had put in charge of the agencies exactly what was going on. You always knew when the agencies were making progress because people would start explaining why they couldn't do something. We were interested in why you couldn't do something, but we wanted a more positive approach, looking at it from the standpoint of how can we do it, not how can we avoid doing it.
I think one of the real frustrations in the Robb administration was the lack of money. The first probably 15 months of his administration was very much focused on how are we going to get enough money to balance the books.
The cabinet secretaries, agency heads, and I entered into an agreement to try to squeeze more money out of all of the existing programs and free up at least the inflationary part of that money so that we could apply that money to education and some to economic development, so that and those are areas where you really get a positive return on your investment.
His favorite place to eat was McDonald's. And when we went to McDonald's and ordered, he would never order a cheeseburger, always a hamburger, because he couldn't justify the 10 cents extra for the cheese. That was a point of honor with him.
Some have suggested that he spends the public's money a little bit like he spends his own, very sparsely. So I think in terms of investing, when he puts some money in a program, you know that he has no alternative but to do it. On the human rights and civil rights side of things, on the other hand, I don't think you'll find anybody that's more committed to really making sure everybody's included. So it's an interesting mix, and I think that was really the magic of his approach to Virginia.
Chuck Robb appointed more women and minorities to positions of responsibility than any other prior governor, and it was for him the highest personal priority.
Chuck Robb was committed to civil rights right from the get-go. It wasn't something that anybody suggested, wouldn't this be a nifty political idea? He brought it with him to the table. I think it's really very much a part of him.
One of the things that I wanted to do was make sure that all of Virginia and all of its strengths were represented in state government. And so I was able to bring in women and African Americans and other ethnic and religious minorities. And I always made sure that they were absolutely well qualified, at least as well qualified as the person they might have been replacing.
There were 8 African Americans and 112 women in January of 1982. And by the end of the Robb administration, there were upwards of 900 African Americans, including the first black member of the Virginia Supreme Court. And there were upwards of 1,400 women.
Regrettably, up until that time, with a few exceptions, many of the boards and commissions, many of the agency heads, many of the cabinet officers had never had anybody but a middle-aged or older white male.
I was 32 years old when I was appointed to the Supreme Court of Virginia. I was the youngest justice in the history of Virginia. I was the first African American to be appointed to our court, and it was dramatic. When the General Assembly went out of session, there was a lot of discussion about this is the time that the governor can make a difference in Virginia. He can change things. And bar groups were writing letters, and black politicians were talking about it. This is the time to do something different. And the rest, as they say, is history. I believe that the justices came to conclude that it made an important difference to have another set of eyes looking at a problem from a different perspective and bringing solutions that they might never have thought of, that it made government better to have more views, more insights, a broader range of people, men and women, black and white.
Because it made the government stronger and more representative and more effective, there was never any way it was going to go back.
Everyone, and rightly so, cites Chuck Robb as the education governor. He was.
Learning is a process that lasts as long as life itself. It is therefore incumbent upon us to make certain that the type of education equally valuable to all is the kind of education equally accessible to all.
I happen to think teaching is the noblest profession on earth, and I am absolutely ecstatic about the fact that our baby, our youngest daughter, is a teacher.
That's why I became a teacher, is looking back on a lot of the stuff he did for education through when he was governor and when he was senator. And that was one of the big places that I didn't know at the time. I mean, when I was little, I didn't understand the ramifications of what he was working on, and I've now since learned about it.
I can't tell you the number of teachers and others who were part of the education establishment after I left office for years, even during the time that I was in Senate, would come up and hug me and said, "You made it possible for me to stay in teaching," or "You made it possible for me to own a house and raise my children," whatever the case may be. I mean, you could tell that you'd really touched people's lives in this respect. And of course, you'd enhance the profession
And he didn't just invest money in salaries. He invested money in electronic classrooms, magnet schools in all disciplines, equipment and computers. So there was a real difference in education. And today we hear a lot about you can't just throw money at problems. And I agree with that. And I think what you have to do is look at the results. And when he left office on SAT scores, for the first time ever, Virginia students were scoring at the top in every discipline. That showed if you make the investments, and they're the right investments, it will make a difference.
The Robb administration presided over the organization for the Center for Innovative Technology.
Robb was interested in harnessing that transition in Virginia's economy from manufacturing to a more service-based economy with the intellectual resources of the state system of higher education. And CIT was envisioned as some kind of a clearinghouse, a means to team business with academe.
I don't think that either the atmosphere or the climate or the conditions would have been established in Northern Virginia for what subsequently came in the mid-1990s had it not been for what Chuck Robb did in the early 1980s.
And so Chuck Robb really, I think, should get credit for planting the first seeds of the technology revolution in Northern Virginia and created the Center for Innovative Technology, which today is really sort of a nucleus for a lot of that business activity.
We had lots of struggles along the way. The most visible was the great prison escape. We had to track down people who were sentenced on death row. We fortunately were able to recapture those that escaped. And I started off my State of the Commonwealth address by saying I accept responsibility for making sure that we do everything we can to make sure these kinds of activities don't happen again.
Mecklenburg was perhaps the most recently built maximum security prison in Virginia. It was built with all of the latest bells and whistles. An escape from death row is unforgivable by definition. And from a prison believed to be a fortress, it was doubly so. There were two Briley brothers. The Briley brothers were at the time the Jesse Jameses of Richmond.
The Briley brothers really were fairly notorious in their own right, but what we would continue to hear once they did escape was reports, the Briley brothers are here, and we had, at one point, people made t-shirts up, I've seen the Briley brothers in my backyard. Although it wasn't funny from a public safety standpoint, it was certainly one of those political issues that you were just hoping they would eventually get them.
The governor's style, being a military person, was to recognize that if it happened on your watch, it's your problem.
He did not try to evade responsibility, and all of us were very proud of that. It was the right thing to do, and it was characteristic of him. It demonstrated pretty clearly that we had a governor who was prepared not only to take credit for achievements and successes, but bear responsibility for failures, for shortcomings.
By and large, Virginia prospered in many ways during that period of time. People were very comfortable and confident about their state government, and I like to think at least we created an environment where Virginians were comfortable in electing a rather eclectic ticket in 1985 because of the effective, I like to think, effective operation of state government and the establishment of some priorities and some processes that worked and that are at least in part responsible for some of the benefits that we enjoy today.
I think in the key areas, education, the environment, equal opportunity, and transportation, he was an outstanding governor and made us all proud to be Virginians. We wanted and we were conscious of, all of us who worked for him, that we had an opportunity with a governor like Chuck Robb to put Virginia first again among the states. we were very self-consciously trying to reclaim Virginia's glory at the beginning of the founding of the nation. Whether that was a little bit grandiose or not, I wouldn't want to say. We were awfully young, but that was our goal and our conviction, and we believed we could help do that.
Virginia is unique, a commonwealth which is more than a state. Virginia is a way of life, a land of incomparable beauty and abundant human and natural resources. Virginia embraces values at once immutable and organic, timeless and unchanging. The Virginia which built the foundation of America and led the young republic so ably and so long is now ready to reclaim the leadership in national affairs she once had.
He was the last governor of Virginia to command the qualities of eloquence naturally in public speaking, as a virtue in public service, and as an art form in the practice of statecraft.
A future Virginia will measure us against the standards of the extraordinary past that we have inherited. And the reminders of that past are close around us.
In my mind, two things stand out about Chuck Robb as governor. The first is that he was a strong proponent of education at all levels. He believed in it. He particularly put emphasis on primary and secondary education, but he was also good for higher education. The second part of the Robb legacy is perhaps even more important, and that is racial tolerance. Part of it was the legacy that he had from Lyndon Johnson. African Americans voted 96% of their votes for Chuck Robb in 1981, overwhelmingly for him. And he recognized that and rewarded that during his administration, not just with appointments, but also with the approach he took to the African American community.
I think the ultimate impact that he had on education in this Commonwealth and the ultimate impact he had starting the Center for Innovative Technology will provide him a place in the history of this state that will be very significant.
He made Virginians see that all the people ought to be involved. More people should be at the table. A better Virginia is based on having greater inclusion. That was what he did. It doesn't bring down the government to have men and women, blacks and whites included.
The most important thing that Chuck Robb did as governor was actually accomplished on Election Day. He rescued a two-party system that was in danger of dying. We were moving headlong into a one-party Republican system much faster than I think Virginia was really ready for. Robb will be remembered in large part for restoring a two-party system, keeping Democrats in power for 12 years, and proving that Democrats in the modern age could also win in Virginia.
I think people have maybe underestimated the fact that Chuck Robb's repositioning of the party in Virginia really was an activity that he pursued when he became governor, and that basically what you saw was that the same thing that had happened to Virginia politics in the Democratic Party ultimately then took place in Washington, and he played a major role with the Democratic governors in that. There eventually was a Southern primary. There was a repositioning of the National Democratic Party, and I think it isn't going too far to say that the ultimate beneficiary of that was the Southern governor who then did become president, and it turned out to be Bill Clinton.
When Chuck left the governorship, I think that he accomplished what he set out to do. I'm proud that he was able to do so much in the 4 years that he had.
After him came Blouse's administration, and after him comes Wilder's administration, and so there was a run that was a great run. But now things have turned from that, but Virginia seems to do that. The state of Virginia does that. We do a cyclical thing in Virginia. We keep people in for a time and then we oust them and bring other people in. Maybe it's a searching for what we hope to be the very best in Virginia, and we go back and forth.
The Democrats became respectable. The fact that he left and became a United States Senator is a pretty good testament to what the Virginians thought of him.
Well, first of all, let me say that I did not leave the governorship with the intention to run for the Senate. I knew it was an option. Many of my friends encouraged me to do that or do something else crazy in terms of national office, but that's the nice side of having a successful term and going out in a period where there's a fairly strong public approval for the goals and initiatives and the processes you've set in motion.
He enjoyed a reputation in the state and nationally as a centrist Democrat. It was unclear what his next political office was going to be. There were a lot of people that were suggesting that he would make a good presidential candidate. He was popular. People had a high opinion of him. He was thought of as somebody that was had a bright political future both behind him and ahead of him.
When Robb became governor, the press and public officials had a very different kind of relationship than they do today. And so by the time Robb was running for senator and the White House implications and aspirations were becoming very prominent, there were reports coming out of Robb attending raucous parties. This caused many people to view Robb differently. It made it very difficult for people to see him in the White House. Robb had grown up politically under one set of rules governing the relationship between the press and public officials. Now he was being forced to live under a completely new set of rules governing that critical relationship.
He wanted to get involved in defense and foreign policy work, and he wanted very much to bring the same kind of fiscal discipline to the federal budget process that he had in Virginia.
The United States Senate has a very important agenda. You deal with the great economic issues. You deal with issues of war and peace. But as governor, you're dealing on a day-to-day basis. You get to initiate. You get to follow through. You get to see the results of your action. You get to interact with people in a way that is very personal. So there's a sense of urgency, immediacy in the governorship that you don't have in the Senate.
Unlike most members of Congress and most politicians, he never went down to the floor and bragged, and he never went to a political campaign rally and talked about himself, and he never used the pronoun I. He would talk about what the Congress was doing as a whole or what kinds of programs were being supported, but he never said, I did this, or I did that, or I'm doing this for you. He treated people both as governor and as senator with dignity and respect. He was comfortable in his own skin. He never tried to act as if he was something that he was not. I remember in 1994, during the campaign, we took him down to the stock car race in Martinsville. We took him to the shad planking in Wakefield. He did not show up in jeans and a bomber jacket. He showed up in his blue suit with his white shirt and his red tie and his wingtip shoes. And the thing I remember is people responded to that. You would think that people would say, you have to dress him for the part. You have to put him in boots and a cowboy hat. You've got to, make him into something he's not. We would never dream of suggesting that to him. And when he showed up at places like that, people appreciated the fact that he made an effort to get there. Men would straighten up when he walked into a room.
It's a tough way to go into politics to lose an election. You're better off retiring. And I see this happen every now and then.
That I must tell you that I didn't share to the same extent when I started my period of public service as I have as I bring this phase of my public life to a conclusion. The causes that we have fought for together have meant a great deal to me, and I thank all of those who care passionately about making certain that we provide that essential human dignity to all of our fellow human beings.
Chuck Robb's made it very clear in any number of statements after the election that his elective political career is over and he won't stand for office again. He's very happy with that decision. This is a man who has had a long and productive public career both as governor and senator and has enjoyed every minute of it, but he's happy to spend time with his family now and be out of the limelight.
I think that he's going to miss it terribly. I think anybody that's devoted his life to public service and has been in the limelight and is now out of the limelight, he's going to miss it. And he's a relatively young man.
At any given time, there are about 16 members of the Senate who've also served as governor, and I haven't met one yet that wouldn't tell you that they thought that being governor was more personally satisfying and rewarding. Shouldn't be governor forever, but it's clearly the best job in state government, and there is no higher honor than being governor of Virginia.